Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas I'd watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Citadel, a great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I'm labeling this as a crime-centric. I typically throw a lot of spy thriller stuff under crime-centric regardless, but this is also science fiction-y in some regards, so I don't know. If it ends up being a massive part of the show, then I'll switch it over to like a super fantasy vibe, but I mean, that's kind of irrelevant, but it just for my own posterity. We'll see. I'll probably figure that out by the time I watch all 3 of the episodes, because I'm getting to this a little bit late, but once they get uploaded, then I'll probably determine then and there what they fall under, crime centric or super fantasy. Once again, that's just a me thing, kind of irrelevant to you, but either way, getting into the episode, I knew going into this, obviously it's been a while since I watched a trailer, but I knew going into this, I mean, first and foremost, I wasn't expecting us to jump into the deep end like we did. I guess in my head, I almost kind of thought we'd start off with like at least with Mason and maybe even Nadia, with both of their memories going. I think that is going to be the plot point even with Nadia, just from what I remember from the trailer, that she lost her memory too. I was thinking it was more so like someone caused them to lose their memory in the regards of someone wiped their memories, like some kind of like technology. It's like, no, at least in Mason's case, his memory got wiped from the train explosion, but... So I knew this was like some high like class like spy thing, but it's interesting to know what Citadel is. So, you know, once again, they trying to throw you into the deep end where you get them on like basically their last operation before everything went sideways. So it was interesting, and I do like Nadia and Mason's back and forth. It's that they definitely have history. Later on, they're just referred to as partners, but it sounds like they banged. It seems like there's something like either it's a thing of it was always will they, won't they, or they did, but they wanted to try and keep things professional. I wonder, did they always work together? Did they always because they are like solo acts themselves, but they were like quite the dynamic duo. So I wonder, did they obviously didn't always work together, because this was supposed to be something Nadia was supposed to handle on her own, the whole Gregor situation, but Mason got brought in just kind of as backup. So. But like I said, that smooth kind of gives you that. I'm not the most well-versed in James Bond. I've seen bits and pieces of the movies. I don't think I've ever seen an entire James Bond movie all the way through. But it kind of gives definitely that spy feel of just like that charming and kind of like suave, like back and forth that they both have. But yeah, and it turns into a whole crazy sequence, especially when Mason goes toe-to-toe with like Gregor's handler. I am a big fan of tight space fighting like that. I think that's always, because it's like, yeah, you're kind of limited in what you can do, and you know, every corner and everything is something you can get tossed into, and you know, I mean, especially later when Mason ended up stabbing the dude in the leg and just like drug it down, and then got pushed away and then kicked it into home dude's like even deeper. I was like, Jesus. I mean, once again, just like when things get like nasty and like hand-to-hand gritty like that, it's just like, also tried trying him in the toilet. I don't know why in fighting and stuff, I'm always a big fan of like trying to drown someone in the toilet. I don't know why, unless it's like the good guys being drowned in the toilet, but for some reason I like it when the bad guys getting drowned in the toilet for whatever reason. Either way, guy got flung out kicked out the window that was shattered and flung off the train, and Nadia's confronting Gregor, but he's not the person she thought he was. They thought this was all about some uranium that he had in a bag, in a case, but it turns out he knows exactly who Nadia is. He's part of a group named Manticore, who has basically systematically been destroying Citadel, because she had referenced like, okay, he's like, are you CIA MI6? And she's like, oh, like, do I look like I play for the minor league? So you're like, okay, so Citadel sits above every other organization. So we learned so much more about Citadel later. I mean, since I'm on the topic, I'll go ahead and talk about it. I thought that was interesting development of like, okay, so it's like, it's an old organization that's kind of hidden in the shadows. It is made up of people from different countries, from different organizations, basically a whole bunch of spies from around the world gathered to basically, because they didn't like the way their respective countries handled stuff, because hey, these spies are the ones that kind of shape the world into what it is. Basically, they're the reason why maps get redrawn the way that they do, because they instigate stuff, assassinations, starting wars, kind of like everyone's out for their own, especially when it comes to spyhood stuff. Like, you destroyed so many lives that way. So Citadel exists for, hey, we are the greater good. We are aligned with no nation. We kind of just do what is for the greater cause, for the greater good, removing things from the board, which I'm sure includes nuclear weapons like the uranium that they were supposed to be going after this mission. Making this assumption purely ahead of time. I can only assume the reveal is going to be that Citadel is not the good organization that they think it is. Now, whether Bernard doesn't know that, or maybe it was at one point in time, but maybe it lost its way, especially with Gregor making that thing of like, Manticore is all about the truth. He's like, you guys were a myth, but the fact is that for so long you've believed this lie, and Manticore is here to reveal the truth, because I guess Citadel isn't the altruistic organization that maybe some of its members were led to believe, and it seems like that's what Manticore is all about, trying to like take down this organization that they believe is BS. But then later on you find out Manticore's been around doing like disastrous stuff without Citadel around, so it's like, I don't know, it's probably going to be that thing of, oh, the good guys were the bad guys, and the bad guys were... Good guys were the bad guys were the good guys. Or maybe it's just a thing of, maybe we'll find out the very nihilistic point of view, a la The Boys, maybe arguably, that there are no good guys. There's just people doing what they believe is right, because no one believes themselves to be the villain of the story. Everyone believes they're doing this for a good reason, that they are shaping the world in a better way. The people of Citadel, the people of Manticore, so... But I also love that whole action sequence too, like when Nadia and Mason work together to like systematically take down everyone in that train car, which is pretty impressive. But an explosion goes off. Mason wakes up, still in Italy, because they were in the Italian Alps when they were on the train, washed up shore. He's somewhere in Italy, and he has no memory of who he is. All he has is like a passport with this alias and a ring, which you're like, that's actually kind of sucky. I'm sure that's come up beforehand about, I mean, because obviously you can't help but, because I'm like, what was the last spy-ish movie, like full-blown spy-ish movie I watched that probably fell in the same category? It would be the Bourne movies. I've only seen the first three. I've never seen Legacy or the fifth one just called Jason Bourne. But, I mean, that was the whole point of like the Bourne movies, like he never knew who he was. I don't remember if he woke up with a fake identity. But either way, I'm trying to feel it, because I was like, I've seen that in something else and I just don't remember. This in particular, I just thinking like, it's like that sucks. You don't remember anything of who you are. You're just going by this story that you told that you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be this person. No one can find anything about me in any databases. So what did he do? 8 years later, he's lived his life. He got married to Abby, and they had a daughter named Hendrix, which Abby's played by Ashley Cummings. The moment I saw her name in the credits, I was like, Ashley Cummings, which I know her from, it's pronounced Nosferatu, but the show it's spelled out NOS482. I said 8. NOS4A2, but it's like a fancy way of spelling Nosferatu. Yeah, it was this show on the AMC. She was one of the leads in the show. But either way, Vic. I couldn't remember her last name. I mean, not last name. I couldn't remember her character's name until just now. It clicked in my head. But Vicky. They just call her Vic for short because her name's Victoria. Either way, putting all that aside, in all these years, he still hasn't remembered anything, but he goes to see the therapist who's like, well, why now? But for him, it's like, my daughter's asking me these simple questions of like, well, what was it like? What was your mom like or your dad like? And it's like, when I'm not able to answer those questions, it sucks. I want to be able to tell my daughter the things I remember about myself, but also I need to know, especially when he's getting flashes of Nadia. It's like, it just, I guess for so many years, he was able to just kind of push it away. But when you have your daughter, which a child is going to be super inquisitive, asking all these questions that you've been asking for the past 8 years, it finally kind of takes its toll on you, and you need to know. So I also love the whole situation with Bernard, that it's like, right, he seems like he's just the tech guy, because you're like, oh man, the tech people don't really do much. the fact is he had those guys like tied up asking them questions. It was a really twisted version of an interrogation where it's like, hey, is this person, it's kind of almost a game of guess who, and it's like, oh, you got the detail wrong, bam, and the guy's like, are you crazy, bam, oh, I guess it's just you and me. I was like, I don't know why, it's just, there's something so like, that's why I'm like, there's got to be something more to that character. Maybe he is just going to be like the lovable tech guy that you're going to really like, that you kind of get to know more about. The fact is that he's like, oh yeah, a year away makes the heart grow fonder. He's like, you know who it didn't help? Was my wife. A year apart didn't make her grow any fonder. She made me stay in such and such. And he's asking Nadia, he's like, do you know where that is? It's just like, the fact is we're getting to know him, but I don't know if that's supposed to help like, dissuade you from kind of expecting the twist from him that he might be a bad guy, but I don't know. Especially at a point in time where the only 3 agents we know are him, Nadia, Mason, and Mason. So the traitor would have to be one of them. If anyone, I was like, not unless they're going to heavily set it up at the beginning to make it seem like it was Nadia, when in actuality it was Bernard. It just feels like that's the obvious choice, but especially considering we haven't been introduced to any other agents at this point in time. I mean, because most of them are dead. It seems like Mason and Nadia might be the only one, and Bernard are the only ones. But either way, the situation has caused Bernard, like, because Manticore is led by someone named Dahlia. Well, we don't know the full hierarchy. He explains later on the way, I figured this was going to be the case when Dahlia was like, okay, let the other families know. When she was talking to, like, I guess her assistant or whatever, like, oh, let the other families know. Someone's like, okay, so Manticore is made up of families. Basically, a whole bunch of families basically came together for a group, and so they ended up making Manticore, and they've made a lot of decisions and turned the world and made themselves very profitable. They are literally everything that Citadel, like what we are supposed to believe that Citadel represents. All that Manticore kind of represents the complete opposite. It's kind of Citadel's light to Manticore's shadow, essentially, so it's just the way they've set things up, and just, any good spy story, it's like things aren't going to be that simple. It's just got to be a little more tricky, and, the spy world is very gray area regardless, so that's where I feel like that's really going to come into play. But either way, Bernard heard that Manticore was going after Citadel's X case. It's a case with all the nuclear codes and stuff like that. It also apparently has like all the names of the identities of all the agents. So any that might be out there scattered to the winds that might still be alive. The fact is that Bernard never found any in those 8 years except for Mason. I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, I guess it helps in his case that, hey, he stopped looking for himself a long time ago, and it turns out that Bernard's the one who makes the identities, so it probably went super far under the radar, because Bernard was probably, around the time Mason was probably trying to find out about himself, probably at the very least in that first year, probably Bernard was going super underground, so he probably missed any opportunities to kind of find Mason. Plus, technology has advanced a lot more, so maybe it's a lot easier to kind of be able to track once he's put his DNA in the system, especially DNA for a person that doesn't exist officially. And, I mean, Kyle's the alias and doesn't exist, but also as a member of Citadel, he unofficially existed anyway. So maybe that's kind of the reasoning why it took this long for Bernard to find him. But either way, ended up breaking into his house, kidnapping his entire family to not force him, but tell him who he really is. And I love how narcissistic he is. It's like it took, a great agent, a tech genius, and Mason's like, oh, please. And he's like, and Mason's like, Jesus Christ. He's like, no, Bernard, Orlick, or whatever his last name is. I was like, oh God, you're so full of yourself. But yeah, he tells Mason about who he is, and it's like, right, your mind might not remember, but your body does. You're throwing a knife. Based on the trailer, we'll be seeing that soon enough, and it won't play out the same way. But he's also saying that he believes Nadia is dead because she sent out a signal 8 years ago, but he was never able to get in contact with her, which we had this stinger at the end where we saw her like rise up out of the water from the train crash. So does that mean she remembers? So then why doesn't she remember later on what happened? Like, did she maybe at the last second before the explosion hit, she triggered it, but maybe after the explosion, like, she woke up with no memory? Like, what happened in that regard? Why is she going silent for these 8 years, even to the point Bernard thinks she's dead? So, like I said, based on the trailer, I'm assuming she has no memory either. Not unless she's faking it by the time Mason comes around. It doesn't seem like that's the case, not unless something else came into play. Like I said, that could just been a survival instinct. Once again, your body remembering, but your mind not. That she just like crawled out of the water and was just kind of like, because in Mason's case, he was unconscious during it. I mean, after the explosion, when he like washed up on shore, and maybe he ended up taking a little bit more of a brunt of the explosion than Nadia did. Either way, Mason's now, it's up to him, even though he's not the person that he was anymore. He's not Mason, he's Kyle, but it's like, right, you're going to need to be Mason again to help me stop Manticore from doing what it's doing, getting open this Citadel X case that's got all these nuclear codes that could lead to millions and millions of deaths, or basically so many lives being held hostage for Manticore to do what they want to do. They've got two of their assassins, what was it? Was it Davik and Anders, who are twins, which we saw them saw the aftermath of their work, of them basically busting up a wedding and killing a lot of people. So I did forget about it, but I did love that bit where Bernard was like, "Oh, this is my wife, ex-wife." He's like, ex-wife, and it's like, "Oh, here's my ex-wife, and my ex-wife's current wife." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." It's like, well, I guess she's not a Citadel person, but Bernard is a Citadel person. Eventually, they would have come after his wife and his wife's wife, his ex-wife's wife, and their daughter. Bernard and his ex's daughter. Makes you wonder, I'm assuming their daughter is as old as Hendrix, so she probably doesn't know like what's going on. So, but it's like, right, you got to protect the people that are connected to you. I can only assume, because of where we are currently, that that Mason might not remember his family, but I'm assuming like his mom and dad died. Not unless we're going to find out he's actually an orphan or something, you know. I'm curious about learning the Citadel's like process of how they pick people too. Like, what organization did Mason belong to? An organization beforehand? Like, do they recruit people from the respective groups? Say like, for example, he worked for MI6 and maybe like Nadia worked for he worked for the CIA and she worked for like MI6 or like Mossad or something like that. Like, that's where I'm like, what if that ended up being the case? Like, do they recruit you, or do they recruit you just because they see you have an aptitude, and I'd assume you'd have to be in some spy organization for them to recruit you, but to know that the Citadel's been around that long is really interesting. Like I said, 100 years. It's like, it's not like some extremely like deep-seated, rooted like Templar stuff. Once again, it's only a century old, but that's still really interesting. I'm very intrigued from what we've seen so far, so I'm very excited to ultimately see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good